Thomas Bennett woke up at 4:30 in the morning, just like he did every day for the past 8 years. His small room in the guards' quarters was neat and tidy. Everything had its place. His red uniform hung perfectly on the wall. His tall black bearskin hat sat on the shelf above it. Thomas liked order. Order was safe. Order was what made a good royal guard. He washed his face with cold water to shake off sleep. The mirror showed a handsome man of 30 with short brown hair, strong jaw, and eyes that had seen war before coming to the palace. Thomas had served in the army for 4 years before joining the Queen's Guard. He was good at following rules. He was good at standing still. He was good at being what others wanted him to be. Another day serving the crown, he said to himself, a daily reminder of the honor of his position. Outside, London was still dark as Thomas put on his uniform, checking every button twice. The Queen's Guard could not have a single thing out of place. Tourists came from all over the world to see them, to take pictures, to try to make them smile or move. But Thomas never broke. Not once in 8 years had he shown emotion while on duty. By 5:45, Thomas stood in line with 20 other guards, all wearing the same red coats and tall black hats. Their commander walked past them, checking each man carefully. Bennett, the commander said with a nod. Thomas was always perfect. Some of the younger guards looked up to him. They called him the statue because he could stand for hours without moving a muscle. At 6 o'clock sharp, they marched out to their posts. Thomas's spot was at the east gate of Buckingham Palace. He would stand there for 6 hours. No talking, no moving, no matter if it rained, or if the sun burned hot, or if his legs ached for rest. As the morning went on, the palace came to life. Staff hurried about. Important people in fancy cars drove through the gates with a nod to Thomas, who saw everything but reacted to nothing. Then something different happened. A new guard Thomas had never seen before was assigned to the post across from him. This was unusual. Thomas knew all the guards by now. The new guard was younger, maybe 25, with a face that seemed more alive than most guards. He stood at attention correctly, but his eyes moved more, taking in the palace, the people, even Thomas himself. During the shift change at noon, Thomas finally learned the new guard's name, James Wilson. First week at the palace, James told the other guards as they walked back to their quarters. It's all a bit much, isn't it? All this ceremony for buildings and people most of us never even see. The other guards looked shocked. You didn't question things in the Queen's Guard. You just did your duty. Thomas found himself watching James during lunch. The new guard didn't fit in. He asked questions. He laughed too loudly. He didn't seem to understand that the Royal Guard was about erasing yourself, becoming part of something bigger than any single person. Wilson, Thomas said, approaching him after the meal. A word of advice. The questions and opinions, keep them to yourself. That's not how things work here. James looked at Thomas with curious eyes. Bennett, right? The statue, they call you. Perfect guard, perfect record. It's called doing my job, Thomas said stiffly. I'll do my job too, James said with a small smile. But I can't help wondering if there's more to being the guard than just standing still and looking pretty for the tourists. Thomas walked away, bothered in a way he couldn't explain. For the first time in years, his perfect routine felt shaken. There was something about James Wilson, something challenging, something different, something that made Thomas wonder if 8 years of perfect service had cost him something he hadn't realized he was missing. James Wilson was not born to be a royal guard. Unlike many of his fellow guards who came from military families, James grew up in a small house in Manchester with his mother, who cleaned offices at night, and his father, who fixed cars. They were good people who worked hard, but they never had much money. James was smart in school. His teachers said he asked too many questions, but they liked how his mind worked. When he won a scholarship to a good school, his parents cried with joy. James promised them he would make something of himself. After school, James joined the army. He did well there too. He was strong, and quick to learn. But even in the army, James would ask, "Why do we do it this way?" Some officers didn't like this. Others saw that James's questions often led to better ways of doing things. When James was picked for the Queen's Guard, his parents were so proud they framed the letter telling him he was chosen. James sent them money from his first pay. He wanted them to have an easier life. Now, 2 weeks into his new job, James found himself watching Thomas Bennett whenever he could. There was something about the perfect guard that made James curious. No one could be that perfect all the time, could they? What was Thomas like when he wasn't being a guard? One evening, James saw Thomas in the guard's library. Thomas was reading a book about ships. James walked over. "You like ships?" James asked. Thomas looked up, surprised. He closed the book quickly. "My father was a sailor," he said. "I grew up near the sea in Cornwall." James sat down across from Thomas. "My dad fixes cars. I grew up smelling like oil and metal." Thomas almost smiled. Almost. "Cornwall was all fish and salt air," he said. "I've never seen the sea," James admitted. "Not the real sea. Just pictures." This time Thomas did look surprised. "Never. But it's not that far from Manchester. You know where I'm from." Now it was James's turn to be surprised. I heard the others talking," Thomas said, his face going back to its perfect guard look. They sat in silence for a moment. "Why did you become a guard?" James asked finally. Thomas looked at the book in his hands. "My family has always served. My father in the Navy, his father in the Army. It's what we do." "But why the Queen's Guard? You could have done many jobs in the military." Thomas was quiet for so long that James thought he wouldn't answer. "I like the order of it," he said at last. "Everything is clear. The rules never change. You know exactly what's expected." James nodded. "I became a guard because it's one of the hardest jobs to get. I wanted to prove I could do it, that someone like me could stand in Buckingham Palace." Thomas looked at James with new eyes. "And you have. You're here." "Yes, but I'm not very good at it yet," James said with a small laugh. "Not like you, the statue." Thomas winced at the nickname. "You'll learn." "Will you teach me?" James asked. The words came out before he could stop them. Thomas stared at him. "No one asked for help in the Queen's Guard. You either made it or you didn't. Guards competed with each other. They didn't help each other." James said quickly, "I could use some tips. On standing still for so long. My legs get so tired." Thomas should have said no. He should have told James to figure it out himself, like everyone else did. Instead, he heard himself say, "Meet me tomorrow. 5 in the morning. The empty drill hall." As James walked away, Thomas wondered what he had just done. In 8 years, he had never gone out of his way to help another guard. What was it about James Wilson that made him break his own rules? And why did the thought of seeing James alone tomorrow make his heart beat faster? The empty drill hall was cold at 5 in the morning. Thomas got there first. He always got everywhere first. He paced the large room, wondering why he had agreed to help James. This was not like him at all. The door opened, and James walked in. His hair was messy, like he had just woken up. He smiled when he saw Thomas. "You came," James said. "I said I would," Thomas answered. Thomas always kept his word. "So, how do you do it?" James asked. "How do you stand so still for so long?" "Yesterday my back hurt so bad I could barely sleep." Thomas nodded. "Everyone struggles at first. The secret is in how you stand." He showed James how to put his weight on his heels in a certain way. Like this. It puts less pressure on your back. James tried to copy Thomas's stance. Like this. No, more like. Thomas hesitated, then put his hands on James's shoulders to adjust his position. As soon as he touched James, he felt something strange, like a small electric shock. He quickly stepped back. "Sorry," Thomas said. "It's fine," James said, but his face was red. "Show me again." For the next hour, Thomas taught James all the tricks he had learned over 8 years. How to shift your weight without anyone seeing. How to keep your mind busy during the long hours. How to deal with tourists who tried to make you laugh or move. The worst is when they put their face right in front of yours and make stupid faces, Thomas said. James laughed. "Yesterday a woman kept waving her hand in front of my eyes saying, 'Hello, anyone home?' What did you do?" I didn't move, but inside I was thinking about pushing her into the fountain." Thomas actually laughed. It felt strange. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed while in the palace. They practiced standing at attention. Thomas showed James how to breathe so his chest didn't move too much. As the morning went on, Thomas found himself enjoying teaching James. It felt good to share what he knew. "Why are you helping me?" James asked suddenly. "Most of the other senior guards seem to want us new ones to fail." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I guess I see something in you. Something different." The door to the drill hall opened. Both men stepped apart quickly, though they hadn't been standing very close. Another guard, Davis, walked in. Davis was one of the senior guards about Thomas's age. He had never liked Thomas much. Well, Davis said, looking back and forth between them. "What's going on here?" "Just some extra practice," Thomas said, his face going back to its guard mask. "How helpful of you, Bennett," Davis said. His voice didn't sound friendly, especially for the new guard who can't stop asking questions. James stood up straight. "I asked for help. Bennett was kind enough to give it." Davis looked at James, then at Thomas. "Interesting. Very interesting." He walked slowly around the room. "You know, Bennett, in all the years I've known you, I've never seen you help anyone before." He stopped in front of Thomas. "Makes a man wonder why now. Why him?" Thomas felt his heart beating fast. "We should go," he said to James. "Our shift starts soon." As they left the drill hall, Davis called after them, "You two make a nice pair." Very touching. Outside, James looked worried. Is he going to cause trouble? Thomas didn't answer right away. He was thinking about the way Davis had looked at them, like he knew something. But what could he know? Thomas wasn't even sure himself what was happening between him and James. "Let's just focus on our duty," Thomas said finally. But as they walked to their posts, he couldn't help wondering if he had made a mistake. Not in helping James, but in letting someone see that James had become important to him. November brought cold winds to London. The Royal Guards had to stand in freezing rain and biting cold. Even the thick red coats didn't keep out all the cold. This was the time of year when even the strongest guards found it hard to stay still. Thomas stood at his post near the east gate. His face showed nothing, but inside he was worried. For 2 weeks, since Davis had found them in the drill hall, Thomas had tried to keep his distance from James. They spoke only when needed. Thomas went back to eating alone. He told himself it was better this way. But he couldn't stop thinking about James. At night, lying in his small bed, Thomas would remember James's laugh, the way his eyes lit up when he asked questions, how he didn't seem afraid to be different. Today was the worst weather yet. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and a harsh wind blew across the palace grounds. Thomas could see James at his post across the courtyard. Even from a distance, Thomas could tell James was struggling. His shoulders were tight, and his face was red from the cold. The senior officer walked past, checking each guard. When he was gone, Thomas looked around carefully. No one was watching. Slowly, without being obvious, Thomas moved his position just a little. It wasn't enough that tourists would notice, but it was enough to block the worst of the wind from hitting James. It was against the rules. Guards must never move from their exact spot. But Thomas couldn't bear to see James suffering. Hours passed. Thomas's own face and hands grew numb with cold, but he stayed in that position, shielding James as best he could. When the shift finally ended, Thomas marched stiffly back to the guards' quarters. His body ached from standing in the cold for so long. He was one of the last to enter the warm building. In the hallway outside his room, James was waiting. "You moved," James said quietly. "You blocked the wind for me." Thomas looked up and down the empty hallway. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," James insisted. "No one else noticed, but I did. You helped me again." Thomas didn't know what to say. He had never broken the rules before meeting James. Now he was breaking them more and more. "Thank you," James said. He stepped closer to Thomas. "Why did you start avoiding me?" Thomas looked at the floor. "Davis." The way he looked at us. "It's dangerous, James." "What's dangerous?" "This. Whatever this is between us." Thomas's voice was barely above a whisper. James was quiet for a moment. "I've made friends before. It didn't feel like this." "That's what I mean," Thomas said. "This isn't just friendship, is it?" Neither man spoke. The question hung in the air between them. Finally, James said, "Would it be so bad if it wasn't?" "You know it would," Thomas answered. "Guards have been dismissed for less. We serve the Queen. We represent the crown. We can't be." "Can't be what?" James asked. "Can't be true to ourselves." Thomas looked up and down the hallway again. "Someone could hear us." "There's no one here," James said. "Just for a minute, can we be honest? I haven't stopped thinking about you since that day in the drill hall. When you touched my shoulders, I felt something I've never felt before." Thomas's heart was racing. "We can't do this, James. I've worked too hard to get here. You have too." "I know," James said. "But is it worth it if we have to hide who we are? If we have to pretend we don't care about each other?" Thomas didn't have an answer. All his life, he had followed the rules. He had done what was expected of him. But James made him want something different, something that seemed impossible. "I need time to think," Thomas said at last. James nodded. "I understand. But Thomas, I'm not going to pretend forever. Life's too short for that." As James walked away, Thomas stood frozen in the hallway, feeling more confused than he had ever been in his life. Christmas was coming to London. The palace was busy with extra visitors and special events. The guards had more work and longer hours. Thomas and James saw each other every day, but they had little time to talk. Both men kept their feelings hidden as they did their duty. One cold December morning, the commander called all guards to a meeting. He stood before them looking serious. "Next week, the palace will host a very important visitor," he said. "The President of France is coming for talks with the Queen. Security will be at the highest level. Every guard must be perfect. Any mistakes will not be forgiven." The room was quiet. Everyone knew what this meant. More pressure, more eyes watching them, more chances to fail. "Bennett Wilson," the commander said suddenly, "you too will guard the east entrance during the visit. It's a key position. Don't let me down." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. He and James would be working together, side by side, for the most important event of the year. He looked across the room at James, who seemed just as surprised. After the meeting, Davis walked past Thomas with a small, mean smile. "Interesting choice. Putting you two together," he said quietly. "I wonder who suggested it to the commander." Thomas knew then that Davis had done this on purpose. He wanted to see if Thomas and James would make a mistake while working together. It was a trap. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He got up and walked through the quiet palace grounds, thinking hard about what to do. Near the gardens, he saw another figure sitting alone on a bench. It was James. "Couldn't sleep either?" Thomas asked, sitting down next to him. "Too much on my mind," James said. They sat in silence for a while, looking at the stars. "Davis set us up," Thomas said finally. "He wants us to fail." James nodded. "I know, but we won't give him that chance. We'll be perfect guards, just like always." "It's not just about the job now," Thomas said. "He suspects something between us." "Is there something between us?" James asked. His voice was so soft Thomas almost didn't hear him. Thomas took a deep breath. Yes, at least for me there is. James turned to look at Thomas, his eyes wide. For me too. Without thinking, Thomas reached out and took James's hand. It was the first time they had touched since that day in the drill hall. Thomas's heart was beating so fast, he thought it might burst. We could lose everything, Thomas whispered. Our jobs, our future. I know, James said, but I've been thinking, what kind of future is it if we can't be who we really are? If we have to hide and pretend forever? Thomas looked at their hands, joined together in the moonlight. I've never felt this way before. It scares me. Me too, James admitted, but I'm more scared of living my whole life following rules that don't let me be happy. A noise made them both jump. They quickly moved apart as a palace worker walked by with a cart of supplies. The moment was broken, but something had changed between them. Something important had been said. We should go back, Thomas said, standing up. We need rest for tomorrow. James stood too. Whatever happens with this French president visit, we'll face it together. Even if we can't show it, we'll know we're not alone anymore. As they walked back to their rooms, staying a proper distance apart, Thomas felt both terrified and strangely free. For the first time in his life, he was choosing his own path, not just following orders. And even though that path might lead to trouble, he knew he couldn't turn back. The visit from the French president was 4 days away. Thomas and James had 4 days to prepare for the biggest test of their lives, not just as guards, but as two people trying to find a way to be true to their hearts in a world that didn't allow it. The day of the French president's visit arrived. The palace was full of important people. Cars with dark windows drove through the gates. Men in black suits with small earpieces walked everywhere, checking rooms and hallways. Thomas and James stood at their posts at the east entrance. They wore their best uniforms with extra polish on their buttons and shoes. They had not spoken much in the past 4 days, but they had practiced their duties perfectly. They were ready. Davis walked by several times, watching them closely. He seemed disappointed that they were doing their jobs so well. Each time he passed, he would stop and check something small, a button, a strap, the angle of their hats. But he could find nothing wrong. The morning went by smoothly. The president arrived with his team. There were speeches and photos. Guards changed shifts, but Thomas and James stayed at their posts. This was the most important duty they had ever had. In the early afternoon, something strange happened. Thomas noticed a man who didn't seem to belong. He wasn't dressed like the other officials. He kept looking around nervously. The man walked near the east entrance where Thomas and James stood guard. He was carrying a small bag. Thomas watched him from the corner of his eye. Guards were trained to notice anything unusual, and this man was definitely unusual. When the man put his bag down near a large plant pot by the entrance, Thomas's heart started beating faster. The man walked away quickly, leaving the bag behind. Thomas had to make a decision fast. The proper thing to do was to report this through the chain of command. But that would take too long. The French president and his team were due to walk through this entrance in less than 5 minutes. Without moving his head, Thomas whispered to James, "Black bag by the plant, left by a man in a brown coat. Could be dangerous." James didn't move or change his expression, but he whispered back, "What should we do?" Thomas knew the rules. He was breaking them by even talking while on duty. But this was too important. "I'll create a distraction. You check the bag." It was a huge risk. If the bag was nothing, they would be in serious trouble for leaving their posts. If it was something dangerous, well, at least they might save lives. Thomas waited until he saw the group of officials approaching in the distance. Then he did something no Queen's Guard had ever done during an official duty. He fell forward, as if fainting, his tall bearskin hat rolling across the floor. Everyone looked at Thomas. Staff ran to help him. In the confusion, James quickly moved to the plant pot and checked the bag. Inside, He found a small metal box with wires and a blinking light. James had seen enough during his military training to know what it was, a listening device. Someone was trying to spy on the private talks. James caught the eye of the security chief and motioned him over. Quietly, he showed him what he had found. The security chief's face went pale. He quickly called his team on his radio, speaking in code. Within minutes, security men in suits had taken the device away. The French president was directed to a different entrance. No one outside of security knew what had happened. Thomas was back on his feet, claiming he had just been dizzy for a moment. He returned to his post, his face red with embarrassment, but his eyes alert. That evening, Thomas and James were called to the commander's office. They stood at attention, expecting to be punished for breaking protocol. Instead, the commander looked at them with serious respect. "What you did today was against every rule in the book," he said. "You left your posts. You spoke during duty. You caused a scene." Thomas and James stood silently, accepting whatever punishment would come. "You also prevented what could have been a major diplomatic incident," the commander continued. "That device was planted by a spy. It would have recorded private conversations between Her Majesty and the President. The security team has asked me to thank you for your quick thinking." Thomas and James couldn't believe what they were hearing. However, the commander said, his voice becoming stern again, "No one can know about this. The public must never learn that there was a security breach in the palace. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," they both said. As they left the office, Davis was waiting in the hallway. He had clearly expected to see them leaving in disgrace. Instead, he saw the commander shake their hands. The look on Davis's face was one of complete confusion. Spring came to London, bringing warm sunshine and flowers to the palace gardens. 3 months had passed since the French president's visit. Thomas and James had become heroes among the other guards, though no one outside the palace knew what they had done. Davis had stopped watching them so closely. He still didn't like them, but he couldn't find any reason to report them. Thomas and James were careful. They did their jobs perfectly. They only spoke privately, away from others. They kept their feelings secret, but those feelings grew stronger each day. On a beautiful May afternoon, the Queen was holding her yearly garden party. Hundreds of guests walked around the palace grounds, drinking tea and eating small sandwiches. Thomas and James were assigned to guard the area near the rose garden. "Perfect day for a party," James said quietly as they walked to their posts. Thomas smiled. "Too bad we have to stand still and watch." "I'd rather be standing still with you than dancing with anyone else," James said. Thomas felt his heart jump at these words. It was still new to him, this feeling of happiness when James said such things. They took their positions on either side of the entrance to the rose garden. The party was in full swing. Ladies in fancy hats walked by. Important men in suits talked about politics. Children ran around the paths, laughing. Then the weather changed quickly, as it often does in England. Dark clouds filled the sky. Wind began to blow hard across the gardens. Guests looked up in alarm. "Everyone please move inside," palace staff called out. "The party will continue in the staterooms." People hurried toward the palace as rain began to fall. The wind grew stronger, blowing hats away and knocking over chairs. Near Thomas and James, a large wooden arch decorated with flowers stood at the entrance to the rose garden. As the wind blew harder, the arch began to shake. A young woman who worked for the Queen was hurrying past it, carrying a stack of papers. Thomas saw it happening before anyone else. The arch was going to fall, and the woman was right in its path. "Look out," he shouted, breaking his guard position and running toward the arch. At the same time, James also saw the danger and ran forward. Together, they reached the arch just as it began to fall. Both men pushed against it, using all their strength to hold it up. "Get away from here," Thomas called to the woman. She dropped her papers and ran to safety. The arch was heavy, made of solid wood and metal. Thomas and James struggled to hold it up as the wind pushed against it. Rain soaked them, making the wood slippery in their hands. Other guards ran to help, but before they reached them, a loud crack sounded. Part of the arch broke away, hitting Thomas on the head. He fell to his knees, blood mixing with rain on his face. "Thomas!" James cried out, still holding the arch with one hand while reaching for Thomas with the other. More guards arrived and took over holding the arch. James knelt beside Thomas, who was dazed but conscious. "You're hurt," James said, his voice full of fear. He took off his red jacket and pressed it against the cut on Thomas's head. "I'm all right," Thomas said weakly. "Is the woman safe?" "Yes, she's safe. Thanks to you." As medical staff hurried over, neither man noticed the photographer. He had been taking pictures of the garden party for the newspapers. Now in the rain, he took a picture of two royal guards, one hurt, one caring for him, both soaked to the skin, with an unmistakable look of love between them. The next day, that picture was on the front page of every newspaper in Britain. The headline read, "Royal Guards save PLAC worker in heroic state." But it wasn't the headline that caught people's attention. It was the photograph itself. The way James looked at Thomas. The way Thomas's hand gripped James's arm. Even though they were both doing their duty, saving someone from harm, the picture showed something more. Something that could no longer be hidden. The photograph changed everything. Thomas sat in the small medical room at the palace, a bandage on his head, looking at the newspaper. James stood nearby, his face worried. "Everyone will know now," Thomas said quietly. "Know what?" James asked, though he already knew the answer. "About us. Look at this picture. It's so clear." Thomas touched the newspaper with shaking fingers. "The way I'm looking at you. The way you're holding me." Before James could answer, the door opened. The commander walked in with Davis right behind him, looking pleased for the first time in months. The commander held a copy of the same newspaper. "Bennett. Wilson. We need to talk," the commander said. His voice was serious, but not angry. "This photograph has caused quite a stir." Thomas and James stood at attention, despite Thomas's injury. "Sir, we can explain," James began. The commander held up his hand. "First, let me say that your actions yesterday were brave and selfless. You saved Miss Phillips from serious harm, perhaps even death. The palace is grateful." Thomas and James stayed silent, waiting for what would come next. However, the commander continued, "This photograph has raised questions. Questions about the nature of your relationship." Davis stepped forward. "Sir, I've been noticing inappropriate behavior between these two for months. This picture only confirms what I've been saying." Thomas felt cold fear in his stomach. This was it. They would be dismissed. Their careers were over. "Is there something between you two?" the commander asked directly. "Something beyond professional friendship?" Thomas looked at James. In that moment, a lifetime of following rules fought against the truth in his heart. He could lie. He could deny everything. Maybe they would believe him. But then James spoke. "Yes, sir. There is." His voice was clear and steady. "We care deeply for each other. We have tried to keep it private and not let it affect our duties." Thomas was shocked. He had not expected James to be so honest. But now that the words were out, Thomas felt a strange sense of relief. "It's true, sir," Thomas added, "but our feelings have never interfered with our service to the crown. In fact, I believe they've made us better guards." The commander was quiet for a long moment. Davis smiled, expecting to hear the order for their dismissal. "This puts me in a difficult position," the commander finally said. "The Royal Guard has clear rules about conduct. No guard has ever openly admitted to such a relationship." "We understand, sir," Thomas said. "We'll accept whatever decision you make." The commander looked at the newspaper again, at the picture of two brave men who had risked their lives to save another. "Times are changing," he said slowly. "Perhaps it's time for some of our rules to change too." Davis's smile disappeared. "Sir, You can't possibly be suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything yet, Davis, the commander snapped. I need to speak with higher authorities about this. Until then, Bennett and Wilson will be on leave. Thomas and James looked at each other in surprise. This wasn't a dismissal. Not yet, anyway. Go home. Rest. Wait for my call, the commander said. And stay away from reporters. The palace will handle the press. After the commander and Davis left, Thomas sat down heavily on the medical bed. I can't believe you told the truth, he said to James. James sat beside him and carefully took his hand. I'm tired of hiding. Aren't you? Thomas nodded slowly. Yes. But what happens now? I don't know, James admitted. But whatever comes next, we'll face it together. As they left the palace that day, reporters called out to them. Cameras flashed. For the first time, they walked side by side, not as just two guards, but as two people who had chosen to be honest about who they were and how they felt. The hardest part was still to come, waiting to learn if their honesty would end their careers or begin something new. 3 weeks passed. Thomas and James stayed at James's small apartment in London. They watched the news every day. Their story had become famous. Some people supported them. Others said they should not be royal guards anymore. The palace said nothing. Do you think we'll ever go back? Thomas asked one morning as they sat drinking tea. James looked out the window. I don't know, but I don't regret telling the truth. The phone rang. It was the commander. Come to the palace tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. The main office. Thomas's heart beat fast as he hung up. That's it then. Tomorrow we find out. That night, neither man could sleep. They had both wanted to be royal guards since they were young. It had been their dream, their life's work. But they had found something even more important, each other. The next morning, they put on regular clothes, not their uniforms. They walked to the palace together. At the gate, guards they had worked with for years let them in with nods of respect. The commander was waiting with several other high-ranking officials. His face gave away nothing. Bennett, Wilson, please sit down, he said. They sat in the chairs in front of his desk. The room was very quiet. I've spoken with many people about your situation, the commander began, including people at the highest levels. Thomas held his breath. James sat very still. There has never been a case like yours in the history of the Queen's Guard, the commander continued. We had no rule for what to do. Davis stood in the corner of the room, looking sure they would be dismissed. However, the commander said, times are changing. The Army changed its rules last year. The Navy too. And the palace has decided that the Queen's Guard should follow. He pushed a paper across the desk. This is a new policy. It says that no guard can be dismissed based on who they love, as long as they perform their duties with honor. Thomas and James looked at the paper in shock. This was not what they had expected at all. You two have shown exceptional service, the commander said. You stopped a spy. You saved a woman's life. You have been perfect guards in every way that matters. Davis stepped forward. Sir, this is against tradition. The guard has always changed with the times, Davis, the commander interrupted. 200 years ago, guards wore different uniforms. 100 years ago, we had different weapons. Change is part of our history. He turned back to Thomas and James. The Queen herself has approved this decision. She said, and I quote, loyalty and bravery matter more than anything else in those who guard the crown. Thomas felt tears in his eyes. He tried to blink them away, but one escaped down his cheek. Does this mean? James couldn't finish the question. It means you can return to duty next week, the commander said. You will continue to serve as royal guards, and you will be the first to serve under this new policy. As they left the office, other guards lined the hallway. Some nodded. Some smiled. One by one, they saluted Thomas and James. Outside in the palace gardens, Thomas stopped and looked at James. I can't believe it. We made history. James smiled. We just did what felt right. We let love lead us. And now others can follow, Thomas said. We won't be the last. 2 weeks later, Thomas and James stood again at their posts, red uniforms bright in the sun, tall black hats perfectly straight. They still did their job perfectly. They still didn't move or smile on duty. They were still royal guards in every way. But something had changed in the palace, something important. And when a little girl pointed at them and asked her mother, "Are those the guards from the newspaper? The ones who love each other?" Her mother could say, "Yes, they are." They were brave in more ways than one. In the years that followed, many other guards would walk the path that Thomas and James had opened. Some would thank them personally. Laws would change. Society would move forward. But Thomas and James didn't think about making history. They just did their duty to the crown and to each other, with honor and with love. And in the end, that was their greatest service of all.